They say that the human brain can sense a lie before the heart is willing to accept it. For 7 years, I lived in a beautiful, sunlit house with a man I thought was my forever. His name was Mark. To the outside world, Mark was the ultimate husband. He was handsome, attentive, and incredibly successful as a senior partner at a top-tier architectural firm. When we walked into a room together, people would whisper about how lucky we were. I believed them. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. My name is Clara. I'm a graphic designer, a woman who details things for a living. I notice textures, alignments, and subtle shifts in color. But for a very long time, I completely missed the shifts in my own marriage. Our story didn't start with red flags. It started with poetry, late-night drives, and a deep, comforting sense of security. When Mark proposed to me on a rainy evening in Paris, I thought my life was a movie. We bought a home, talked about having children, and built a life based on what I thought was absolute transparency. Mark was the kind of husband who brought me coffee in bed every single morning before he left for work. He would kiss my forehead and tell me that everything he did for us. And I believed every single word. But perfection is a fragile mask. It only takes one small, sharp crack for the whole thing to shatter into a million pieces. For me, that crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no anonymous phone calls or tearful late-night confessions. It was just a regular, boring Tuesday. Mark had left his luxury SUV at home because it needed a routine oil change, and he had taken my smaller sedan to work. He asked me if I could take his car to the dealership down the street during my lunch break. I agreed, completely happy to help him out. I grabbed his keys, climbed into the plush leather driver's seat, and started the engine. The car still smelled like his expensive cologne, a woody, sophisticated scent that always made me feel safe. As I was driving down the highway, the tire pressure warning light suddenly flashed on the dashboard. I sighed, thinking I should check the car's manual to see what the correct pressure levels were before I handed it over to the mechanics. I reached over to the passenger side and pulled the lever to open the glove box. The heavy leather door dropped open. Inside, there were the usual items: the vehicle registration, a tire gauge, a pack of mints, and a pair of Mark's sunglasses. But stuffed right behind the owner's manual, something caught my eye. It was a flash of bright, neon pink fabric. I pulled the car over to the shoulder of the road, my heart suddenly doing a strange, heavy thud against my ribs. I reached into the glove box and pulled the fabric out. It was a piece of lace, a pair of women's silk underwear, tiny, neon pink, and smelling intensely of a cheap, sweet vanilla perfume, a perfume that I had never owned in my life. I sat there in the quiet cabin of the car, the engine idling softly, holding this piece of cloth in my hand. The world around me seemed to lose all its volume. The traffic buzzing past on the highway became completely silent. I stared at the lace, my mind frantically trying to make sense of it. Could it belong to a family member? No. Could it be a joke? No. Could it have been left there by a previous owner? Mark bought this car brand new. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It knocked the breath right out of my lungs. My perfect husband, the man who kissed my forehead every morning, was sharing his car and his life with someone else. I looked at the pink fabric, and a cold, dark feeling began to settle deep inside my stomach. The woman I was 5 minutes ago was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone who was about to uncover a web of lies deeper than she could ever imagine. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and put the item exactly back where I found it. The game had just begun. When you discover something that shatters your reality, your first instinct is to scream. You want to throw things, demand answers, and let the anger consume you. But as I sat in that car, looking at the closed glove box, a strange, freezing calmness washed over me. If I confronted Mark right now, what would happen? He was a brilliant lawyer's son and a corporate partner. He knew how to twist words. He would tell me it belonged to a coworker who dropped it by accident, or that he picked up a hitchhiker, or that someone was trying to frame him. He would make me feel like I was the crazy one. He would gaslight me until I apologized for doubting him. No, I wasn't going to give him that luxury. If I was going to face him, I needed more than a piece of fabric. I needed undeniable, bulletproof proof. I drove the car to the dealership, got the oil changed, and drove it back home. When Mark came back that evening, I watched him closely. It was terrifying how easily he wore his mask. He walked through the front door, kicked off his shoes, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed my cheek. "Thanks for taking care of the car today, honey," he said, his voice smooth and completely steady. "Of course, babe," I replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster on my face. "Anything for you." I watched him eat dinner. I watched the way he cut his steak, the way he laughed at a joke on TV, the way he casually scrolled through his phone. I looked at his hands, the same hands that had held that neon pink lace. I felt a wave of intense nausea, but I swallowed it down. I needed to become an actress. I needed him to believe that everything was completely normal while I began to dismantle his secret life. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house felt heavy, almost suffocating. Once his breathing became deep and rhythmic, I slipped out of bed. My heart was pounding so loudly I was terrified it would wake him. I crept down the hallway to the kitchen, where his phone was charging on the counter. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. I knew his passcode. It was our anniversary date. I typed it in, and the screen illuminated his face in the dark. I immediately went to his text messages. Nothing, just work emails, chats with his fantasy football league, and texts from his mother. I checked his call logs, no unusual numbers. I checked his social media apps. Clean. For a second, I felt a surge of false hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But then I remembered the sweet, cheap vanilla scent on the fabric. It hadn't gotten into that glove box by magic. I decided to look deeper. I opened his banking app. Mark and I had a joint account for household expenses, but he also had a personal account for his business expenses. I scrolled through his recent transactions. Most of it was standard: expensive client lunches, gas stations, corporate dinners. But then I noticed a pattern. Every single Thursday for the past 4 months, there was a charge of exactly $220 at a boutique hotel downtown called the Lumina. The charges were always made around 2:00 p.m., Thursday afternoons. Mark always told me that Thursday was his heavy field work day, when he had to visit construction sites outside the city and would often be unreachable due to poor reception. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was hideous. He wasn't visiting construction sites. He was constructing a completely different life right under my nose. I took out my own phone and snapped photos of his banking screen, documenting every single transaction at that hotel. I placed his phone precisely back on the charger, ensuring the wire was angled exactly how he left it. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep a wink. I lay next to a stranger, realizing that the man I loved was a phantom. The next morning, when he kissed me goodbye with that same warm, familiar smile, I didn't feel sadness anymore. The grief was burning away, leaving behind a cold, hard sheet of pure steel. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He had no idea that the room was about to collapse on top of him. The following Thursday, I took a day off from work. I didn't tell Mark. I dressed in dark, unnoticeable clothes, grabbed a pair of sunglasses, and rented a cheap silver sedan from an agency across town. I needed a car he wouldn't recognize in his rearview mirror. By 1:30 p.m., I was parked half a block away from Mark's office building. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. At exactly 1:45 p.m., his luxury SUV pulled out of the parking garage. I waited for 2 cars to get between us, and then I followed him. Driving through the city traffic while tailing your own husband is an out-of-body experience. You feel like you're watching a movie of someone else's tragic life. He drove straight downtown, pulling into the valet parking lane of the Lumina Hotel. I parked across the street in a public garage, ran to the lobby, and kept my distance, hiding behind a large decorative pillar near the entrance. A few minutes later, the glass doors swiveled open. A young woman walked in. She couldn't have been more than 25. She had long, blonde hair, wore an expensive designer dress, and carried herself with an air of complete entitlement. And then I smelled it. Even from 15 feet away, as she walked past my pillar, the heavy, cloying scent of cheap vanilla perfume filled the air. It was her. I watched as Mark stepped out from the hotel elevator. The moment he saw her, his face lit up with a brilliant, genuine smile, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He wrapped his arms around her, lifted her slightly off the ground, and kissed her passionately right there in the lobby. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by iron claws. The sheer disrespect, the absolute lack of shame of doing this in a public space, crushed what little hope I had left. I pulled out my phone, zooming in with the high-resolution camera. I took pictures of the embrace. I took pictures of them laughing. I took pictures of him holding her hand as they walked back into the elevator together. I found out from the front desk clerk, using a small cash tip and a fake story about wanting to surprise my brother, that Mark had a standing reservation for room 402 every single Thursday. I sat in my rental car for 3 hours, waiting. When they finally came down, they walked out to the valet stand. Mark handed the valet a ticket, and a few minutes later, his SUV pulled up. He opened the passenger door for her, kissed her one last time, and she slid into the seat. The very seat I had occupied just days prior. Now I had names, dates, locations, and photographic proof. But I wasn't done. I needed to know who she was. I followed her after Mark dropped her off at a high-end apartment complex. It didn't take long to find her social media profile using geotags from the hotel and her apartment building. Her name was Chloe. She was an intern at Mark's architectural firm. As I scrolled through her public profile, my blood ran completely cold. She had posted pictures of expensive jewelry, luxury weekend getaways, and fine dining experiences. In one photo, she was holding a glass of champagne, showing off a gorgeous diamond bracelet. The caption read, "Spoiled by my favorite partner. He says he's trapped, but he's all mine soon." The bracelet looked identical to one I had seen on our joint credit card statement months ago, which Mark told me was a corporate retirement gift for a major client. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was funding her entire lifestyle using our shared resources, while telling her that he was trapped with me. He was planning to discard me like trash once he had everything lined up. The anger that exploded inside me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't a blind, chaotic rage. It was a cold, calculated fire. Mark wanted to play a game of chess. Fine, but he didn't realize I had already taken his queen. When a devastating truth is revealed, many people make the mistake of reacting instantly. They pack their bags, they yell, they file for divorce immediately. But I knew that if I did that, Mark would use his expensive lawyers to protect his assets. He would hide money, shield his corporate shares, and leave me with nothing but a broken heart. I had sacrificed 7 years of my life supporting him while he built his career, working late nights, and taking care of everything at home so he could shine. I was not going to walk away empty-handed while he and his intern laughed in a luxury apartment bought with my compliance. I needed professional help. The next morning, I visited the office of a high-profile, ruthless divorce attorney named Eleanor Vance. She was famous for dismantling arrogant men in court. I laid out all the evidence on her glass desk: the photos of the hotel encounters, the bank statements, the screenshots of Chloe's social media, and the neon pink lace, which I had safely bagged. Eleanor looked through the files, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Clara," she said, leaning back in her chair, "your husband has been incredibly sloppy, But more importantly, he has been using marital funds to maintain his mistress. In this state, that constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We can strip him of almost everything, but we need to time this perfectly. She explained the plan. If we filed for divorce now, he would immediately get defensive and start tying up his corporate bonuses. However, the firm's annual partner payout was happening in exactly 3 weeks. Mark was expecting a massive, 7-figure bonus based on a landmark commercial project he had just closed. If we waited until that bonus hit our joint account and then struck, he wouldn't be able to hide a single penny of it. "Can you pretend everything is fine for 3 more weeks?" Alina asked, looking at me with deep concern. "It's going to be mentally exhausting." I looked her straight in the eye. "I can do it." The next 21 days were the hardest days of my life. Every single day was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had to cook dinner for him. I had to listen to him talk about his stressful days at work. I had to let him hug me, forcing my body not to stiffen in disgust every time his skin touched mine. I would look at him and think about how bizarre it is that someone can look you in the eyes and promise you forever, while actively planning your destruction. Meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes. With Alina's guidance, I quietly moved my personal savings to a private account he couldn't access. I gathered all our property deeds, tax returns, and corporate investment documents, copying them onto a secure digital drive. I also did a little research into the corporate policy of Mark's architectural firm. The firm prided itself on its strict ethical standards and family-first branding. Their corporate charter had a zero-tolerance policy for executive relationships with subordinate interns due to liability risks. If a partner was found to be using company time and funds to engage with an intern, it was grounds for immediate termination and forfeiture of partner shares. Mark wasn't just risking his marriage. He was risking his entire empire for a thrill. He thought he was completely invincible. He thought I was just a quiet, submissive wife who spent her days choosing color palettes for websites. He completely forgot that a graphic designer's greatest skill is seeing the entire composition and knowing exactly which element to remove to make the whole structure fall apart. As the days ticked closer to the final showdown, Mark's behavior began to change. He became overly confident, almost arrogant. He started dropping subtle hints about how our lives might evolve in the future. He began complaining about how our house felt too big, and how maybe we should consider living separately for a while to find ourselves. One evening, while he was sipping a glass of wine, he looked at me and said, "Clara, do you ever feel like we've outgrown each other? Like we're just 2 different people now?" The sheer audacity of him trying to lay the groundwork to make me feel responsible for the upcoming split was almost comical. "I don't know, Mark," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level as I washed a dish in the sink. "I feel like I know exactly who you are." More than ever, actually. He chuckled, completely missing the double meaning. "Well, life is about growth. I just want to make sure we're both happy." "Oh, I'm going to be very happy soon, Mark. Don't you worry about that," I replied with a sweet smile. 2 days before the big partner bonus was scheduled to be deposited, Mark announced he had to go on an urgent weekend conference in Miami. He told me it was a massive networking opportunity and that he would be incredibly busy, so his phone would likely be off during most of the presentations. I knew exactly what that meant. I checked Chloe's social media profile from a burner account. Sure enough, she had posted a photo of a luxury beachside resort in Miami with the caption, "Counting down the hours until paradise with my favorite guy. Airplane, palm tree." They were using our money to fly first class to Florida for a romantic getaway while I was supposed to sit at home, playing the lonely, clueless housewife. "Have a wonderful trip, sweetie," I told him as I helped him pack his suitcase. I carefully folded his designer shirts, making sure he looked perfect for his mistress. I even tucked a small bottle of cologne into his grooming kit. I wanted him to feel completely relaxed. I wanted him to feel absolutely safe. Because when a man feels safe, he becomes incredibly careless. The moment his Uber pulled away to take him to the airport, I called Alina. "He's gone to Miami with her," I said. "Perfect," Alina replied, her voice sharp and clinical. "The partner bonus is scheduled to clear into your joint account tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. The second that money hits, I am filing the paperwork with the court. By the time he lands back on Monday, his world will be frozen." That weekend, while Mark was enjoying the sun and beaches of Miami with a 25-year-old intern, I spent my time packing up my life. I hired a moving company to come to the house on Sunday. I cleared out all my clothes, my artwork, my personal belongings, and the furniture that I had paid for with my own money. I left the house completely empty, except for a single chair sitting in the middle of the living room. I felt a profound sense of release as each box was loaded into the moving truck. Every empty wall represented a lie that had been stripped away. I wasn't losing a husband. I was gaining my freedom. I was taking control of a narrative that he thought he was writing. He thought he was going to surprise me with a divorce after securing his fortune. Instead, he was walking directly into an ambush of his own making. Monday morning arrived. The air was crisp and cold. At exactly 9:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my banking app. The annual partner bonus had cleared. A massive sum of money was sitting in the account. Within 5 minutes, Alina had electronically filed the divorce petition, citing irrefutable evidence of infidelity and financial dissipation. Simultaneously, she filed an emergency injunction to freeze 50% of that bonus into a private escrow account, ensuring he couldn't transfer it out or hide it. But that was just the legal side of things. The true climax of my plan was about to take place at Mark's sanctuary, his corporate headquarters. Mark's flight landed at 11:00 a.m. He had texted me saying he was heading straight from the airport to the office for a major mandatory partner meeting at 1:00 p.m. He told me he would see me at home for dinner around 7:00 p.m. At 12:45 p.m., I walked into the sleek glass and steel skyscraper of his architectural firm. I was dressed in a tailored, sharp black suit, wearing dark sunglasses and bright red lipstick. I looked powerful. I felt powerful. The receptionist looked up, surprised to see me. "Oh, Mrs. Mrs. Sterling. Mark isn't in his office right now. He's in the main boardroom preparing for the partner meeting." "I know exactly where he is, Sarah," I said, giving her a polite nod. "And actually, I'm here to deliver some important documents for that meeting." I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the grand executive boardroom. Through the glass walls, I could see the senior partners sitting around a massive mahogany table. The managing partner, a stern older gentleman named Arthur, was at the head of the table. Mark was standing near a projector screen, laughing and chatting with another executive, looking tanned and relaxed from his Miami weekend. Chloe was sitting in the corner of the room, holding a notepad, looking up at Mark with admiring eyes. I didn't knock. I simply opened the heavy double doors and walked right in. The entire room went dead silent. Every head turned to look at me. Mark froze, his smile instantly evaporating. His face turned a strange, pale shade of gray. "Clara," Mark stammered, stepping away from the projector. What are you doing here? This is a private partner meeting." "I know, Mark," I said, my voice projecting beautifully across the quiet room. "I'm sorry to interrupt, gentlemen." But as the spouse of a senior partner, I felt it was my civic and corporate duty to deliver some essential paperwork that directly affects the integrity and financial stability of this firm. Arthur stood up, looking confused. "Clara, what is the meaning of this?" I stepped up to the table and laid down several thick, professionally bound folders. I slid one to Arthur, one to the head of human resources, and placed one directly in front of Mark. "Inside these folders, you will find comprehensive documentation of a serious breach of corporate policy," I said calmly. It includes photographic evidence, hotel receipts, and financial records proving that senior partner Mark Sterling has been engaging in an inappropriate long-term relationship with a subordinate intern, who is currently sitting right there in the corner. Chloe's eyes went wide with pure terror. She dropped her pen, her face turning completely white. Mark scrambled to open the folder. The moment his eyes landed on the high-resolution photos of him and Chloe kissing at the Lumina Hotel, and the receipts of the Miami trip funded by company-reimbursed accounts, his hands began to shake violently. "Clara, stop this. You're insane. This is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It's not a lie, Mark," I said, looking at him with absolute pity. "The divorce papers were filed this morning. Your personal bank accounts are frozen. And as for your position here..." "Well, I'll let Arthur handle that." Arthur opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. His expression hardened into pure, icy rage. He looked at Mark, then at Chloe, and then back at the evidence. The firm's reputation was his life's work, and Mark had just dragged it through the mud. "Mark," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. "Step away from the podium. You are suspended effective immediately pending a full board review for corporate misconduct. Security will escort you and Chloe out of the building in 10 minutes. Mark looked around the room, desperately looking for support from his colleagues, but every single partner turned their face away from him. He was toxic. He was radioactive. His empire had crumbled in a matter of seconds. Watching a powerful man completely fall apart is a fascinating sight. Mark didn't say another word. He couldn't. The evidence was absolute. It was a checkmate from which there was no escape. Security guards arrived a few minutes later, escorting a weeping Chloe and a completely broken Mark out of the executive suite, past the whispering eyes of every employee in the firm. I walked out of the building right behind them. The fresh air outside hit my face, and for the first time in weeks I could breathe deeply. Mark was standing on the sidewalk, his tie undone, his hair disheveled. He turned around and looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of intense fury and pure desperation. "Why did you do this, Clara?" he hissed, stepping toward me. "You ruined my life, you destroyed my career, you took everything from me." I stopped and looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a deep, profound emptiness where my love for him used to be. "I didn't destroy your life, Mark," I said quietly. "You did. The moment you decided to treat our marriage like a joke. The moment you thought you could use my love and trust as a shield while you built a life with someone else. I just brought the truth to light. You built your house on a foundation of lies, Mark. Don't be surprised when it collapses." He stared at me, completely speechless. He tried to speak, to offer one last lie, one last manipulation, but the words caught in his throat. He realized, finally, that he had no power over me anymore. He turned around and walked away into the crowded city streets, looking smaller and more defeated than I had ever seen him. A few hours later, Mark arrived at our house, likely intending to pack his things or find a place to hide. But when he opened the front door, he was met with nothing but empty space. No furniture, no carpets, no art on the walls, just a single wooden chair sitting in the middle of the barren living room. On that chair, I had left one final item, the neon pink lace underwear from his glove box, inside a neat little frame with a sticky note that read, "Thanks for the memories. Your key no longer works." The locks had been changed an hour prior. The house was sold 3 weeks later as part of our court-mandated asset division. The legal battle that followed was brief. With Eliner's ruthless efficiency and the mountain of undeniable evidence, Mark was forced to settle quickly to avoid further public embarrassment. I walked away with 70% of our total assets, including more than half of that massive partner bonus he had worked so hard to secure. Mark was officially terminated from the architectural firm for gross misconduct. His reputation in the city's professional circles was completely ruined. No top-tier firm wanted to hire a partner who brought that level of drama and legal liability into the workplace. Last I heard, he had to relocate to a small town across the country, working a low-level consulting job, living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment. Chloe left him the second his money ran dry, realizing that the older, successful man she was spoiled by was nothing more than an empty shell. It has been 2 years since that Tuesday afternoon when I opened the glove box. If you had told me back then that my life would be completely dismantled, I would have been terrified. I would have thought that I couldn't survive the pain. But human beings are incredibly resilient creatures. We are like glass. We can shatter, but we can also be melted down and forged into something much stronger, much sharper, and infinitely more beautiful. Today, I live in a beautiful apartment overlooking the coast. It's decorated exactly how I want it. There are no secrets here, no heavy silences, no shadows of doubt. I used the money from the settlement to launch my own independent design agency, which has grown to become incredibly successful. I don't work to build someone else's dream anymore. I build my own. Sometimes, when I'm driving my own car, I look over at the glove box. I don't feel pain anymore. I don't feel anger. I just smile because that little piece of pink fabric was the catalyst that saved my life. It was the key that unlocked my prison door. Life has a beautiful, poetic way of balancing the scales. When someone chooses to betray you, they aren't just hurting you. They are setting a chain of events into motion that will eventually return to them. Betrayal is a debt that life always collects with heavy interest. To anyone out there who is currently sitting in the dark, wondering if the person they love is telling the truth or feeling the crushing weight of a recent betrayal, I want you to know this. The pain you feel right now is not the end of your story. It is simply the end of a chapter. Do not let your anger make you reckless. Do not let your sadness make you weak. Stand still, gather your strength, look at the big picture, and remember who you are. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when it's time to walk away, don't just leave quietly. Walk away with your head held high, your truth completely exposed, and your future firmly in your own hands. Mark thought he was taking away my happiness when he cheated on me. He had no idea that he was actually giving me the greatest gift of all, my freedom, my strength, and a life that is entirely, beautifully mine.